What's up, everybody? I'm Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris K. Welcome to another exciting episode of Debating Metal. And on this episode, we're going to try something new. It's called Favorites.
Kenneth and I will choose a band with an extensive discography, and we're going to discuss our favorite song from each album. For our first favorites episode, we picked our favorite rock band from Down Under, AC/DC.
Here in America, AC/DC has 16 albums, 1 EP, 2 box sets, and 2 soundtrack compilation albums. It's the first compilation album, Who Made Who, that qualifies for our purposes because it contained 3 new tracks at the time. And at the end of it all, we're going to give you our big 4 heavy metal hard rock albums of 1975, the year of AC/DC's first release. So Chris, AC/DC favorites. Basically, we're going to pick one song from every album, and we're going to go over it and tell the people why it's our favorite song. Basically, that's it, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Some of these bands have these massive discographies, like, 16 albums. So there's always that one song that kind of stands out to you, and you may put the record on and listen from beginning to end, but there's a lot of other times you may go, man, that I want to listen to that one song.
No, absolutely. I mean, I could probably rattle off all the one songs off the top of my head, but it's an interesting concept, and the reason I say that is because I remember back when Motley Crue released Decade of Decadence, they had a stipulation amongst themselves that they were going to pick 2 songs from each of their albums that they were going to put on this quote-unquote greatest hits compilation. So it did not take into account hit singles or what song was better than another or whatever. They just picked their 2 favorite songs from each album and went with that. So, like, for instance, Shout Out the Devil. Okay, Shout Out the Devil had 3 songs that were pretty big in terms of the fan favorites. Too Young to Fall in Love, Looks That Kill, Shout Out the Devil, and then even then some more were fan favorites beyond that. They even released Helter Skelter as a single. So thinking about that, they only could choose 2. And I don't even remember what 2 they picked, but it was an interesting concept. So this is very similar in concept to that. Well, we just get to pick one.
The other thing is, so when we do our greatest hits episodes, we're coming to a consensus, right? And sometimes we like certain songs off an album that are not the most popular. Sometimes we like the really deep cuts. And so this is an opportunity to kind of talk about those particular songs too.
Exactly. And it's if we choose a deep cut, because in some cases we might not choose a deep cut. It might be the most popular song on the album.
Yeah, for sure.
And to follow up real quick with that Motley Crue analogy I was making, what they released on Decade of Decadence was Shout at the Devil and Looks That Kill. So their biggest single at the time, which was Too Young to Fall in Love, did not make their greatest hits album, which was Decade of Decadence, that was released in 1991. So that tells you something, in terms of how they, what they were picking for their favorite songs. All right. But we're talking about AC/DC today. So, since this was your brainchild, why don't you go ahead and start first, and then we'll go run down the songs. Or you want to explain first before you start how we're going to do this?
Yeah, so basically we're going to kind of trade off back and forth and talk about each album in order. It's a little odd with AC/DC because we are going with the international releases, and because the international releases went a little bit out of order, say for instance Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. I always say done cheap for some reason, but Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap came out after Bon Scott had passed away, around the same time as For Those About to Rock. And Jailbreak is kind of an odd release too. It came out in 1984, but it's 74 Jailbreak, as in they recorded those songs in 1974. And some of those were from the original release of High Voltage, whereas that material was split between TNT and High Voltage, etc. But we're going to go with the U.S. releases, and we're going to actually start with Jailbreak because it was 74 songs. So from Jailbreak, My favorite song, and I really had to think about this because I actually like a lot of the material that's on Jailbreak, but I really thought about it, and my favorite is definitely the title track, Jailbreak. I'm a big fan of that video. I remember watching it when I got the Family Jewels collection, and I thought that was just so cool. One thing I really enjoyed about Bon was that he could tell a story with his lyrics, and I think that's something that didn't really carry over as much with Brian. They would usually focus on one kind of thing with Brian, and sometimes that changed. I'm not saying it's always the rule, but definitely there was more storytelling when Bon was the singer, and it didn't have to be a super complex story, but it painted a picture. Like you're listening to this protagonist escaping from jail and how he doesn't want to live his life in that situation for the rest of his life, and it's a cool story. It's just fun to sing along to, and it's just, for me, that's the one I always go to.
Now, Jailbreak, 74 Jailbreak, coming out in 1984, it was weird because look, people aren't stupid, and especially American music consumers, they knew that those songs were already available. They knew that they were, I would say the music connoisseur, the music buyer, a regular music buyer knew that those songs were already available. So they probably got them out of an import bin in some record store back in the day. But to have it finally released in America was pretty cool because the average listener didn't have that stuff. Didn't know that it was already out. So it was a very confusing time for AC/DC because they have a singer that passed away in Bon Scott. They released Back in Black, and then shortly thereafter, they're getting ready to release For Those About to Rock, and then the American record company says, you know what, we're going to go ahead and release Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap now in the United States, and it's like you basically killed your own momentum on another album. And then that album comes out, For Those About to Rock. Then another album comes out, Flick of the Switch, and they say, oh, by the way, we're going to throw in this little EP in between, and from older songs, again, from Bon Scott. So it was a really weird time, that early to mid 80s for AC/DC. Shit was going left and right for them in terms of, what songs were coming out, when, and this, that, and the other thing. But this album, 5 songs, 74 Jailbreak EP, 5 songs, 4 of which were written by the band. So one was a cover song, which is Baby Please Don't Go. Looking at all the songs and basically reviewing everything, I had to go just like you and pick the title track, Jailbreak, because it's just such a unique song compared to the other stuff. It wasn't, true blues. It was a really cool story. There's so many different things about it that were really neat. The way they recorded it, the way the guitars are, the way they try to make the guitars make certain sounds, like a machine gun and stuff like that. I thought that song was really cool. The fact that they had a video accompanying it was even cooler, although probably nobody saw that video until MTV came around, and even then, probably not much, since, because that wasn't like a regular video on MTV or anything.
Yeah, it probably aired in different regions than what we saw, and I didn't see it until Family Jewels came out. So. Oh
wow! Okay, cool. Yeah, I had seen it a few times on it. To get it on MTV, it was like, maybe Headbangers Ball once a month or every couple months or whatever. You would say, oh, cool, they play this song, but because they had other songs in the 80s that they were trying to play and promote, especially with when Blow Up Your Video came out in 88. That was the height of Headbangers Ball. So that's that song, that's the way I want to rock and roll, and I forgot what the other single was on that. Those songs were really popular, and they were playing that video all the time, or those videos. But anyway, I agree with you. Jailbreak on that album.
All right, so moving on to the second one, which would be High Voltage. Technically their first U.S. release. What did you have as your pick?
All right, on High Voltage, that was a unique one, because you were talking about the international or the American release, whichever way you want to look at it, because there is the Australian and then there's the international. I'm going to go with TNT on that one for me. It was very similar to Jailbreak, a very unique kind of song. If you really, really break down and listen to it, doesn't have a regular drum beat. And that's one of the cool things about that song. I mean, it does have a drum beat, but at the same time, it's not your normal kind of, drum pattern, if you want to put it that way. And so there's a lot of cool things about that song that I like, and then at the end, it just goes into this like hysteria type of thing where the whole band is just jamming on the instruments. I mean, there's a lot of songs to choose from on that album. And, I could have gone a couple of different ways. I mean, the big song on that album it's a long way to the top. Rock and Roll Singer's a good song. The Jack, I like Live Wire. High Voltage is okay. But for me, it definitely was TNT. What's your pick?
Well, it's 2 for 2. So TNT is my pick. To me, it's like, it's just badass from beginning to end. It's this, I guess it's Bon Scott or the protagonist of the song just talking about how badass they are. And it's cool. And like you said, it gets very frantic at the end, this like chaos, almost like an explosion of TNT at the end. Mm-hmm. It's super catchy. It makes you just feel like you want to go to a bar fight. It's just, to me, that's the standout track on the album.
Yeah, no, definitely a standout track. I mean, this is a really, really good album. I mean, AC/DC started their career off in the United States with a really, really good album. I mean, it's not like it wasn't their choice. I mean, basically, in Australia, they come out with TNT first. No, excuse me. They came out with High Voltage first. Same title, but it had a whole slew of different songs, half of which showed up on 74 Jailbreak later, and half of which was included on the original High Voltage in the United States. And then they released TNT, which has a lot of the songs that are on High Voltage in the United States. It's just a really weird thing. I mean, obviously the Beatles did that shit, and Rolling Stones did things like that in England, but it just mixing up songs here and there and putting them all over different albums all over the country, all over the world. It's just a pain in the ass, really, if you think about it. But, not my problem.
Well, I mean, now it's much more accessible, but I remember in the 2000s, on my iPod, my second generation iPod, I had all of the Australian releases. I had compiled them from other stuff, from Bonfire, from 74 Jailbreak, etc., because I wanted every song, I didn't want the alternate releases. I wanted them how the bands originally intended. And so that's kind of, in my head, that's the canon of like what AC/DC's albums are. And I know we talk about them in the international release format now, but for the longest time I thought of each album as, my version of High Voltage is the Australian version. So,
okay. I mean, that's cool.
It's a little different.
I mean, what I did when I had my iPod and you could see the little album covers, I took High Voltage, the international release, but I put the Australian cover on it just to be different, Shit like that. All right, so we're going to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. What do you got for your pick?
So, I'm going with the title track. Once again, this is one where Bond puts you in the role of the narrator of the song. This time it's a hitman, and it's just one of those tracks that just like you're listening to what this guy can do, and he's just another badass, right? Has a unique sound. It's pretty simple, but it's really memorable. The riff just fits it perfectly, and it's the vocal choices, the kind of chanting I, and then the the way that he says "dirty deeds done dirt cheap," the scream at the end, everything is just badass again.
So, what's weird about Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is, so first of all, Americans don't get exposed to it till much later on, right? They get the record version, and the version that they get on their record is slightly different than the original Australian release. Then the CD world happens, and they get another shorter version on the CD, which I don't get that, but it's like they kept messing with the times, and there was like little edits here and there throughout. And so there's like 4 different versions floating around this world of,
like, the original's like over 4 minutes, then they cut it down to 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's really weird,
3.5.
And they're not remixes either. They're just straight full blown edits. Sort of like what they did. Like I don't know if you recall this, but like Quiet Riot's "Come On Feel the Noise," they cut out like half the solo, and it's like, what? Well, why? Was the song really that much longer that you had to cut that out? But anyway. They did stuff like that. And so Dirty Deeds, it's one of those songs that just has like 4 different versions floating around. So what I did was, when I finally got the Australian release, that's the one I use as my full version, basically, when I have it on my phone or my iPod or whatever you want to call it now.
You're like, yes, 20 extra seconds.
How many more bits is that off my hard drive? Anyway, but Dirty Deeds is not my choice. My choice off of Dirty Deeds is another very cool story, Big Balls. If you want to talk about double entendre, I mean, that song is the epitome of, talking on one side of your mouth and meaning something else with the other, because that is absolutely one of the coolest songs, but you almost feel ashamed to play it in front of your parents, although they never say anything technically wrong in the album. There's no foul language, nothing like that. But, the reference to big balls, we all know, hey, my balls, but they're talking about a gala, a dance, or so you think. I think it's a really cool song. So a dance is what it's supposed to be about, but we all know the truth.
I mean, Bond was the master of double and triple entendre, and that sometimes it was a little less subtle than others. Right?
Yeah, the funny thing about this one is, like, it's less subtle, but yet at the same time, when you think about it, like, it all makes sense to be what they say it is, and it's just so, that just the lyrics alone make this song so cool, but anyhow, we move on to Let There Be Rock. Now, my choice for Let There Be Rock, this is a really good album. If I'm not mistaken, this is my second AC/DC album that I ever owned. And I think, except for one song, and even that is questionable, I like all 8 songs on this album. But I have to go with the title track. If for nothing else, I go with the title track because of the video. Because it's just so cool. Bond's a preacher, and he's preaching the gospel of rock and roll, and it's just so fucking cool.
So I also picked the title track. You're right, this is a really good album, with the exception of Crab City in Blue, which I've said before I think sucks.
But that's the international. That's the Australian version. So
that's
if
the Australian international
release, yes. American,
it's not there.
Problem Child.
Yes, again.
Again. Well, but that's the first time Americans see Problem Child. They don't see the second Problem Child until the album that came out before it 10 years later. That's what, it doesn't make any sense.
7 years later, right? So, so there's this frantic retelling of the origins of rock as it descended down from the heavens, which is telling that metal, rock, music truly is the music of the gods. That's, to me, that's the story of Let There Be Rock, right? So, it's one of those that, just try not to bang your head to that song. With that drum beat, that frantic drum beat, with poor Phil Rudd, having to keep that pace the entire song, and it's just like you said, the music video just cements the greatness of that track.
Oh yeah, and the funny thing, you say poor Phil Rudd. All the drummers that have played in AC/DC have had to play that song, and one of the things I have if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it's 10 minutes or 11 minutes. There's an 11-minute version that came out on the B-side of one of the singles from, I don't know if it was Put the Finger on You or Let's Get It Up for those about to rock. But the B-side was a live track, and Let There Be Rock was like 10, 11 minutes long. They released that version in an edited format on Backtracks, the box set.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it, it's 11 straight minutes of whichever drummer, Phil Rudd, Simon Wright. Yeah, he's just, bass, bass snare, bass snare, bass snare. It's not even like double, like bass snare. It's just bass snare. And they're going at the hi-hat originally, I was listening to Chris Slade, and he was talking like Angus wanted it to be like 16th notes. And he's like, yeah, I'm doing this in eighths. Sorry. But yeah, that's a crazy song. Awesome song. That's why I picked it. Now, the funny thing is, there's a lot of songs to choose from on it, because there's Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, a whole lot of Rosies on that album. I
know I almost picked Hell Let a Rosie.
Yeah, and like for me, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be was probably the close second for me. Bad Boy Boogie's on that one. That's the one that they used to use to do his striptease with on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of good songs on this album. All right, so we're up to Powerage. What do you got?
So I picked, and this was a tough one because there's a few really good songs on this album. This is another one that I think is kind of underrated, and I'm a big fan of this album. But I had to go with Riff Raff. It's one of those really high energy tracks from beginning to end. I think it at the time kind of picks up the pace from what a lot of their stuff was. We just talked about Let There Be Rock, which had super frantic pace. But it's one of those tracks that, it's kind of a bluesy boogie. And I always like those from AC/DC, when they have that kind of like heavy movement to them. It just has a great solo. So that was my pick.
So for the longest time, Powerage was my least favorite AC/DC album. Up until the latter Brian Johnson years, Powerage was definitely my least favorite AC/DC album. It to this day, it's still my least favorite Bon Scott album. And it was really weird because I listened to all these musicians that I get inspired by, and I read these interviews, and every one of them says, "Oh yeah, Powerage is my favorite album. Powerage is my favorite album," and I'm like, why? Let There Be Rock,
great.
Yeah, but I should think Let There Be Rock is so much better. Dirty Deeds is so much better, or in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
It was really, for me, it was really hard. Like Highway to Hell to me is, for in my opinion, the best Bon Scott album. But other people really, really like Powerage. To me, there was too many weak songs on Powerage for me to sit there and say, "Oh, this is the better album." But everyone has their opinion. That being said, over the years, I've begun to appreciate it more. Songs like Rock and Roll Damnation, Riff Raff, Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? Was it
what?
No, not Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? I'm sorry. What's that one track that I was thinking about at the same time?
What's Next to the Moon?
Yeah.
Okay.
That I knew there was something about Next to Something. But then you got cool little smooth songs like Gone Shootin'. It became a more appreciated album for me over the years. But still, it takes a lot for me to really push that album up. However, there is one song on there that I'm going to put it this way. My favorite Bon Scott song, Sin City. And that's my choice for Power Age. I love that song. I love that song. Again, another really cool storytelling song. You know, they're basically describing everything about Las Vegas. And it's a really cool song. I love the bass line on it. You know, it just, and then when I heard it in concert from the band, you know, it was just like, oh yes, this is so great. That's one of the few songs that I really, really look forward to hearing. And there've been a couple times I've seen AC/DC where they haven't played it, but I think the last time I saw them, they did play it. I can't remember, but that's my favorite song off that album.
I mean, that was the one that I really struggled with. Like between Riff Raff and Sin City, I went back and forth.
Yeah, Riff Raff has risen up the ranks for me because it's so cool.
Yeah, but I mean, I love that album. I mean, Rock and Roll Damnation for me could easily be a top pick as well. I love Damnation. I mean, sorry, I love Down Payment Blues, Cold Hearted Man. I mean, that album as a whole to me is great from beginning to end. It really surprises me that you don't like it as much, but I think, you know, over time, sometimes things just take a while to set in. So,
yeah. So moving on to the last Bon Scott album, Highway to Hell came out in 1979, and that is, like I said, like I just mentioned, that is my favorite Bon Scott album. It was one of the earlier albums that I had purchased from AC/DC, and I could say to this day, the first CD that I bought a group of four. I'll always remember that. It was Guns N' Roses' Lies, which had just come out, Queensryche's the first album, their first album, The Warning, and AC/DC's Back in Black and Highway to Hell. So those were my first four CDs. I'll always remember that. But Highway to Hell, I mean, it's got great songs, and Highway to Hell is such a fantastic song itself, but that's not the song I chose. The song that I chose for me is Touch Too Much. I really, really, really enjoy the sultriness of the way Bon sings this song. The way the band is not playing super hard. You know, they've got this softness to this song. They're not pushing the boundaries. They're just in a pocket that makes this song so cool, and that's why I like it.
So, this is another one that we actually have in common. Touch Too Much is by far my favorite song on the album. I love it from top to bottom. To me, this is Bon's magnum opus lyrically. The entire album took Bon's lyrics to the next level. To be honest, this was like really what should have broken them to the degree like that. Just, you know, made them national or international superstars. Unfortunately, you know, Bon would pass away not long afterward. But this was one, like, the lyrics are just so clever, you know, and it's you're right, like, there is a different element also to the way that it's played. It's a little softer, it's a little more, what's the term, like, subdued in a way.
Yes.
But when it hits hard. So, like, it has a lot of dynamic range to it, and that's what I really love about this. But again, Bon's lyrics are just so strong in this particular track. That line, you know, she had a face like an angel, smiling with sin, the body of Venus with arms. I just, like, when I first heard that, I was like, damn. That is badass.
Yeah, I mean, Bon had a great way with words. I mean, he was awesome at lyrics, and you could see the definitive change when Brian Johnson took over. And I'm not saying that Brian didn't know how to write lyrics, but
But they did take the lyric book away from him.
They took the ability for him to write lyrics away. So there's and we kind of hinted at this at the previous AC/DC episodes that we've done, but there's a controversy about Bond's lyric book, his poetry book, and what happened to the book after he passed away. And a lot of people are saying, and there's a conspiracy out there, a lot of people say that all the words to the album Back in Black, except for one or two songs possibly, specifically Back in Black, are written, or the words are written by Bon Scott, and that Brian Johnson had nothing to do with it. And if you think about it, after Back in Black, despite how awesome the album is, after Back in Black, every other album after that comes nowhere close to the kind of subtlety that Bon Scott could sing with in the double entendre lyrics. I mean, You Shook Me All Night Long. The lyrics to that are definitively double entendre, and that's just not something that Brian Johnson was ever good at. So it's kind of weird how that album has such lyrics that supposedly are not Bond's.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to talk about that album in a minute. I like your choice because it's the same as my choice. So, touch too much. Highway to Hell. You're up for Back in Black.
All right, so Back in Black, obviously, we just spoke about that Highway to Hell was the last Bon Scott album. They bring in Brian Johnson, and not tremendously longer, it's about 6 months after?
Not even. I mean, he passed away in February. I think the album came out in May or June or July, so it was, he was in the band less than 2 months later, and then they recorded the album.
Yeah, so Back in Black is absolutely amazing album from top to bottom. I like every song on the album. I know you're not a big fan of Let Me Put My Love Into You, but I think just pretty much from beginning to end that album's near perfect. But my particular favorite is Shoot to Thrill. It's just a really killer track. The pacing and the build up are just so benefit, like they just lead right into that main riff, right? Man, it's hard to nail down exactly why. The lyrics on this album, like you said, they're still like kind of in between what would come later with Ryan and where Bond's lyrics were. They're really solid on this album, but I think this one, like, even though it's kind of like thinly veiled what it's talking about, what I also like about Shoot to Thrill is that it kind of references other stuff like that Bond would have in previous songs. Basically his use of firearms and as a concept in songs. So it's like a nice little tribute to Bond in a way. For a song of that era to not have a single or a music video but get airplay to the degree it did, it's a great track.
Shoot to Thrill is by far my favorite AC/DC song. Those first chords hit, and I am cranking it up as loud as I can go. And all the neighbors get to hear along with me. I love that song. Just the lyrics are cool. The chorus is cool. Get it down to the breakdown and just the way how clean that album was recorded. I mean, AC/DC, all their albums have been recorded really clean at that point. But it just the perfect bass drum, perfect snare snap. I mean, the guitars are crystal clear. It's amazing how awesome that album sounds. And listening to Shoot to Thrill at max volume, it is just amazing. I love that song. Love that song. So that's my song choice.
I was about to ask you, so is that your pick?
That's my pick. All right. For Those About to Rock.
That would have been really funny, though, if you're like, so my pick is Hell's Bells.
Yeah. Although that's up there. But no, it's Shoot to Thrill. All right, so For Those About to Rock comes out a year later. And, touching on what we were just talking about lyrics and Bon Scott and Brian Johnson, it is a complete 180 when it comes to the kind of style of lyric writing that AC/DC was known for at that point. So things changed a little bit. But the really cool thing about it is it's still a very, very, very good album. And for me, it had a lot of good songs that I liked. I mean, I liked the song "Let's Get It Up." I like "Put the Finger in You," or pick the finger on you.
All right.
"Inject the Venom," "Evil Walks." That was a really cool song. "COD." I mean, it had a really good bunch of tracks on this album. But for me, ultimately, how can you skip by the title track and realizing that that's the song that ends every single AC/DC show? For Those About to Rock, We Salute You is to me the best song on the album. It's my favorite.
Just so you know, listeners, we did not talk about this at all beforehand. All of the matching choices were pure coincidence, but this is another one. So the biggest thing is that this track is just super iconic, and I'm not one of those guys that really like songs about rock and roll. If you have a song like that, I want to say AC/DC has about 47 songs that have rock and roll in the title.
That might be pretty close to accurate, actually.
But here's the thing. This is not necessarily about rock and roll. This is about the fans, right? This is for those about to rock. This is for the people that love rock and roll, right? And the stage show that goes the stage show that goes along with it. The fact that they fired a cannon. They end the show with it. Like, can you really not understand why Brian went deaf?
I know, right?
So this is an iconic track. It's hard not to pick it off this album. As much as I do like this one as a whole, I'm not as big of a fan as the Brian Johnson era, even though I really like Brian. I think the songs were stronger earlier on in their career, but I think this one is also just a really solid album. But I couldn't help but choose this one.
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely you almost had no choice because of everything around it. So
yeah,
I get that. All right, you're up next.
All right, so we're gonna go into Flick of the Switch. Flick of the Switch to me is still a pretty good album. I had to go with the last track on the album, Brain Shake. So I tend to like AC/DC's boogie pace tracks. It's kind of what I said earlier. This one is no exception. For me, this one almost made my list of greatest hits back when we did our greatest hits episode, but it just kind of got narrowly edged out by a couple other songs. So I'm a big fan of this one. I think it's like I said, a pretty good album overall. Guns for Hire is pretty good. Flick of the Switch, the actual title track. But Brain Shake just does it for me more, I think.
So Flick of the Switch ends the era of Robert John Mutt Lange. He did not produce this album. He had produced the previous three. It also is this is the last album that had the covers with the single line drawings outlining something on the cover. Although, and I say that because AC/DC's logo on Back in Black was outlined with a gray line. The same thing with the logo on For Those About to Rock. And then in this one, they had a stencil drawing of Angus Young, and again the logo was a little line. And it was also the like Back in Black was black. For Those About to Rock was gold with a little thing on the front, the cannon, and then this one was white. Mm-hmm. So there was not a lot of creativity when it comes to the album covers for these 3 albums, but that was the end of the trilogy in that regards. The first song I heard off this album was "Flick of the Switch," the title track, and much to my surprise, there was some big hairy dude playing drums. I'm like, who's that guy? And that was Simon Wright, who had taken over for Phil Rudd, who I don't remember. I think Phil quit the band at that point. I don't remember exactly what happened, but Phil was no longer the drummer. Simon Wright was, although Phil recorded the album. We got to remember that. So Phil likes to do that. He records the album, then disappears. So he's done that a few times, not always by his own volition. Anyhow, but that's not my favorite track on this album. I thought this album was pretty strong at the time. And when you realize how much stronger the other albums are, you realize, well, it's got some weak songs. But for me, the best song on in my opinion, my favorite track on this album is "Guns for Hire." It's just so catchy. I love the whole intro with the guitar, and it goes into that little rhythm pattern, and then the drums pop in. I mean, I love that song. That song's awesome.
Yeah, it was up there for me for sure. But so I think in this era, I get more into the deep cuts. So we'll see when as we go or talk about this one. But
so I think from this point forward, there's going to be not as much matching songs. There might be 1 or 2, and the reason being is because the albums get a little wonky, if you want to put it that way. So some of the albums that are not that good are probably you're going to go with the big single off that or whatever. But again, you are into deep tracks like I am, so it all depends. All right, so moving on to the next album, that would be "Fly on the Wall." And that would be the first tour, the Fly on the Wall tour, that I saw AC/DC in concert. That was back in 1985. Yes, 85. You hear that right. So that's 38 years ago now? No, 37 years ago.
Don't make me older than I am.
Well, it's 37. It's 1 year. Sorry.
No.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes. Because I graduated in 87.
Oh, dear Lord. Okay.
All right. So I think if we have similar song on this one, then this whole show is rigged. "Fly on the Wall." AC/DC did something different with this one. I mean, the recording technique is different. It just sounds so different to a point. It's almost like the drums are very bombastic sounding. Not as bombastic as Kiss's "Creatures of the Night," but similar in bombasticness. It was very different from what people were used to with AC/DC, because AC/DC has always been real clean. I mentioned that before. So this was a strange one. Plus, for this one, with the era of videos, they literally released like 4 or 5 videos for this album, all telling a similar story or all linked together. And then they released a video album on VHS at the time as well. So for me, this album, "Fly on the Wall," probably, I would say probably the first album, maybe "Flick the Switch." I can't remember if I would. Yeah, I was already into AC/DC at that point, so "Flick of the Switch" was the first album to come out that was new once I was liking AC/DC. So this was the second one, but I think I got this one before "Flick of the Switch." I'm gonna go with, for me, there was a couple of songs I like this, but for me, I'm going with "Sink to Pink." I think it was just so catchy in that regards. So that's my choice. What's yours?
So that was one that I thought of, but for me, it's "Shake Your Foundations." Um, I think that was the first song that I heard off of this album, and I mean, I think it's great. Hold on, what was I gonna say? So overall, like you said, the sound of the album is a bit different, right? It sounds a little dirtier. The recording of Brian's vocals sounds a little bit echoey, like he joined a black metal band, but still sang like Brian Johnson. It's a little odd. And to me, Simon Wright, like you said, that the drums are more bombastic, right? They're a little heavier per se. They're not as clean sounding. Simon Wright, to me, he did his job and he did it well. He's a great drummer, but I don't feel like he fits AC/DC sound anywhere like Phil does, right? So to me, this is a rough album. It's not one of my favorites, but it does have a couple tracks that I really do like. Specifically, "Shake Your Foundations," and one thing though is that I like the version that's on "Who Made Who" a lot better. Has much better mixing.
Did they remix it? I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, the vocals are completely remixed.
Oh, maybe
they're not as muffled sounding.
Maybe I should put that version on my iPod or iPhone. I didn't realize that. It's like, I don't know why. It's very interesting that bands, and not a lot of them, but a few bands, Kiss in particular, when they released compilation albums, they decided to remix the songs. Mm-hmm. They've done that on every single, up until the 90s, I guess you could say. No, yeah. Every single, like on Double Platinum, they remixed all the songs. On Smashes, Thrashers, and Hits, they remixed all the songs. I mean, they really destroyed the way I Love It Loud sounded on there.
Yeah.
They just flattened it all out.
So
took away the bombasticness. But
so the logic behind remixing it for "Who Made Who," though, was that it's a soundtrack, and they wanted everything to kind of sound homogenous on that album, right? Everything to sound kind of this, like it came from the same album. So I don't think it's necessary, but I'm glad they remixed a couple of the songs because they do sound better on the "Who Made Who" version. Okay, so that takes us to "Who Made Who," which we were just talking about. So I love the movie that this was made for, Maximum Overdrive. It's not a good movie, but it's a lot of fun, and I watched it when I was a little kid, and I thought it was great. So if you've never seen it, it does have an entire AC/DC soundtrack along with it. And the lead-off single for that, which, like you said, there was only 3 songs that were unique for this album. So in some essence, you can kind of think of it as an EP, even though obviously it's a full album, but it's made up of other songs from the preceding albums. Mine is "Who Made Who." I just love that song. It's got such a really cool riff. I think, like, if you were to put it up against pretty much anything from "Blow Up Your Video" or "Fly on the Wall," even "Flick of the Switch," I think this track beats a lot of that stuff. I'm just a big fan of this particular song. It's always kind of in my top stuff for AC/DC. So,
for me, this album, I remember when the movie came out, when the album came out, I saw parts of the movie. I'm like, yeah, this is trash. So
it is, but I like it.
I couldn't. I don't think I could sit through it at the time. This album was not considered. It was considered a compilation soundtrack album, but it was not considered a greatest hits because it wasn't. Mm-hmm. Although some of their biggest hits are on here, it's not necessarily a greatest hits. The 3 new tracks, as you mentioned, 2 of them are instrumentals, and DT, I believe it is not that bad in terms of what it is. It's a song to me that fits in a movie, and it's meant more for like almost background music for a scene of some sort of action of some sort like that. But the song itself doesn't go anywhere. So it's kind of like specifically meant for a soundtrack. Chase the Ace, I don't think I've listened to that in ages. So, Who Made Who was the obvious choice. It was a big hit for them when this album came out. So, there's just not like I'm going to sit there and say, no, DT has definitely got this one. No, it does. Who Made Who is the right answer on this one. Although, if we wanted to, we could have picked any song from this album.
I mean, we could have, but
right, like that's the way to slide in Back in Black or something like that. Not Back in Black, Hell's Bells. So, but anyway, Who Made Who is the obvious answer here.
Absolutely.
All right, so that brings us to Blow Up Your Video, and this is where AC/DC's career starts to get a little wonky. I mean, when you think about it, like, well, you weren't old enough to kind of experience this at the time, but AC/DC was going through some issues in terms of their career. All the album sales had begun to decline. They had put a ton of effort, a ton of money into the Fly on the Wall album tour and promotion and all that, and it just did not do anything. So they kind of came back with Who Made Who, but that was just a single, essentially, off of that soundtrack. Then they released Blow Up Your Video. And of course, the album title references what's going on at that time of in the world. Video was a big thing. That was a huge thing with MTV. Still at the time playing videos. They had not gone to reality shows yet.
God.
And so, excuse me?
I said, oh God.
So then, but the thing is that they released 2 songs off of the album, and they released Heat Seeker, and then they released That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll. To me, those are the 2 best songs in the album. After that, to me, this album just drops dramatically. There are a couple of songs that maybe can be considered, better than your average song, but they still didn't reach to me, the heights of Heat Seeker and That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll. So for me, the album was down to those 2 songs. And I picked That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll as my favorite song off the album.
All right. I mean, I do like that song, but it's not my pick. So for me, it is one of the deep tracks that I mentioned earlier. It's a track called Two's Up. And I believe I mentioned it before when we talked about our worst to first for AC/DC. But for me, it's all about that this song is very different than a lot of the other stuff they had. It has a little bit darker tone. It's a little bit unfamiliar chord progression for what they're used to. It really sets the song apart from a lot of the other stuff that's on the album. And to me, I think it's a hidden gem in their catalog. You're right, for the most part, Blow Up Your Video is not one of the best albums by any means, but it does have some great stuff on it. But I think Two's Up is one that gets missed by a lot of people. And, I like it when AC/DC kind of pushes themselves outside of that comfort zone. So it's a really cool song.
I mean, this was a make or break time for AC/DC, and really at this point, they were not making it. The album sales basically tanked on this, and the tour was not that successful. So between this album coming out in 1988, they took some time off to come out with the next album. And so we'll talk about that, because that one did change the game for AC/DC. So why don't you go ahead and talk about it?
All right, well, that would be The Razor's Edge in 1990. So a couple years later, this album starts off, though, so just perfectly. Thunderstruck, which is my pick, is one of those songs that I just never get tired of. There's a lot of tracks that you hear time after time after time again, like your Crazy Train or Enter Sandman or, Symphony of Destruction. Some of these songs where I just go, yeah, I love the song, but I don't need to hear it all the time, right? But Thunderstruck is one of those that the riff, I think, is just so interesting. I just don't get tired of it. It has this level of catchiness, that just, it clicks with me for some reason. It's just dancing kind of up and down the scale. It's that fist pumping chorus. And also, AC/DC came to Texas and they had some fun. So, it's an awesome song. I just love it.
Thunderstruck is one of those songs where it's like it's an obvious choice, right? But for me, it's a little bit different. I went deep track, and maybe not so deep. I went kind of like in the middle. I really do like Thunderstruck, and I enjoy every time I hear that song. But I went a little bit farther, a little bit past that. The album itself had some good tracks. It had Money Talks, The Razor's Edge, Are You Ready? Are You Ready was a big song in the WWE.
Now it is, yeah.
For a while.
No, it's the theme song for SmackDown right now.
Oh, it is? Because it was at one point a long time ago. It was a big song with them, and I guess it's back again. So I went with Fire Your Guns, which is the second song on the album. I just love the pace. It's very similarly paced to Let There Be Rock. And not that it's the same type of song or anything like that, but the pacing of the song and the way that the drums are played. But I like, these faster songs always kind of entice me. And this particular one, you get Thunderstruck, you build up, then you get Fire Your Guns, and you just go all guns blazing, to what's the phrase called? To coin a pun, so you go all guns blazing to coin a pun, and then you come out with Money Talks. You kind of slow things down. So the album's good. I like it, and Razor's Edge even slows it down even more, right? So. Fire Your Guns to me was just an outstanding track on it, so I had to go with that one for me.
Yeah, this was the album to me that kind of brought them back to a degree.
Yes. So with that, I was gonna get to that point. This was the make or break album for AC/DC's career up to this point. They had, they did those 3 albums with Robert John, Mutt Lange, and then they decided, we don't want to work with this taskmaster anymore. We don't want to work with this guy who is just basically abusing us into greatness. Jesus, that's such a bad thing. So, flick of the switch, blow up your video, Who Made Who, those and which we call Fly on the Wall, were all either self-produced or produced by family members or former producers. So Blow Up Your Video was produced by Vanda and Young, which is Malcolm and Angus's brother, George Young, and his musical partner, Harry Vanda. Fly on the Wall was produced by Angus and Malcolm. If I believe Flick of the Switch was also produced, it was produced by the band, but that bottom line right there was it's produced by Malcolm and Angus. So you can see they've taken over control of the helm, and then the ship starts sinking. So they went out of their way and they got a producer. And who did they get? They got the biggest producer on the planet at the time. They got Bruce Fairbairn, who produced Bon Jovi's "Slippery When Wet." Then he comes and he produces the reunion album for Aerosmith, A Permanent Vacation, and he also produces, I think it comes out the same year, Pump from Aerosmith. So you got the guy who's right now the hottest producer on the planet, and he goes and he does the same thing. He becomes a taskmaster over AC/DC, and they have to pick good songs. And that's what they did. They got the Razor's Edge, and they got something that was much better, and then produced so much better than the last few albums.
100%.
exactly. And so that's where, that was the turning point in their career. Oddly enough, and that was the other thing too. They also had a new drummer because Simon Wright left, I believe, to join Dio at that point, and that gave them Chris Slade, who, man, that dude is the bomb. He's a great drummer. I mean, if I can't have Phil Rudd, I'll have Chris Slade because he's just the bomb of a drummer.
He's a much better fit than Simon Wright was. And I feel bad for him having been fired.
He still thinks he's in the band.
I mean, that it's unfortunate because like he did everything right. It just Phil is the AC/DC drummer when it comes down to it, right? So
exactly. I mean, he's been with the band since the beginning, and you can't fault him for that. The only thing that I really question about, not the album itself, but the whole career right after the album, is that AC/DC basically disappeared for a few years after this. I mean, the tour was huge, and I think that part of it had to do with the fact that the tour was almost like 2 years long. But they don't release another album for 5 years.
Yeah.
So, that in those days, AC/DC had built up enough of a name that they could take time away and then come back and do a comeback album. But it was, they came back before that. I believe they came back in 93 was Last Action Hero, or 94. It was 94. But they didn't release an album. So it was kind of like, it got everybody excited, but it was a song on a soundtrack.
Last Action Hero was 93.
93. Okay. So it's 3 years later, They put out one song. So it's not for another 2 years that you don't hear anything from AC/DC again after Big Gun comes out. Now, for everybody listening, we did not use Big Gun because it's on a soundtrack album that is not a compilation of AC/DC.
Although it's my favorite AC/DC song on that album.
Is there other AC/DC songs on that album?
No.
But it's unfortunate that it fell that way. Now, we could have, thrown our own technicalities our own way, but we chose not to. So in 1995, the band comes back with Phil Rudd, and they gone with another producer, this time Rick Rubin, and they released the song Ballbreaker. They released the album Ballbreaker. Now, here's the thing about Ballbreaker. They consciously went out of their way to return to the 1970s AC/DC that was a lot more blues-based and a lot more groovier than the 80s-based AC/DC. It kind of worked and kind of didn't work. But for me, I like the song Ballbreaker. I think that's my favorite song. Well, I know it's my favorite song on the album. There's 3 songs I really enjoy on that album. Which one is Hail Caesar, which is very similar to Ballbreaker. And then there's also Hard as a Rock, which was the first song that was released as a single. But Ballbreaker for me was hands down my favorite song on the album.
So this is another one that I'm not a huge fan of as a whole for the album, but we actually do have this one in common. I think Ballbreaker is the best song on the album, period. It's got the best riff. What I like also is Brian's vocals. He's in the lower register a lot here, so he gives it kind of like this coarseness and variation. So he has 2 distinct places where he's sitting. Like he's got the low range, and then he switches over to the high range, and I like that. Like it's kind of a cool effect. And then it's that classic AC/DC sound. You have Phil Rudd back on drums, and he just like he has that sound that brings it back to where they used to be. You're right. It's not exactly the same. They tried to hit that like old AC/DC sound, but it's somewhere in between because they've got the more modern production with the instrumentation of the classic lineup, and then it's got a nice kind of by the book solo from Angus. It's the best song on the album, period.
I agree. All
right, we're getting close to the end. We've only got 4 more albums. So this goes to another 5-year break, right? So they put out Ballbreaker in 95, and then they put out Stiff Upper Lip in 2000. So Razor's Edge, then 5 years for Ballbreaker, then another 5 years for Stiff Upper Lip. So, they've gotten to that point in their career where they don't have to be as consistent with the releases, right? But I thought this was not a bad release as a whole. I remember back when, they came on Saturday Night Live. I want to say that was in the year 2000. And I remember watching it, and I was like, oh, man, this is a pretty cool track. And it wasn't long after that I went out and bought the album. So, I think the song, I don't know if they played more than one. I assume they did. They usually played 2 songs on a performance on that show back then.
Yeah, I think they played Stiff Upper Lip, and then I want to say they sing You Shook Me, but I don't remember.
Okay. Well, I remember Stiff Upper Lip. And so that's kind of what made me go out and get that album. And that's the song that I picked. Back then it was exciting to see bands on Saturday Night Live. I don't know how I feel about it now. I don't even know how I feel about the show now. But I think that bluesy opening, the kind of better production that they had in really years, it just kind of made for this like perfect opening for that album. And to me, it was one of the strongest songs that they had on it. So I just really enjoyed that track.
Yeah, definitely. It was a different kind of album for AC/DC, in as far as, yes, it took another 5 years, and it was definitely a mix between old and new style AC/DC, which is you're talking about Bon Scott era, you're talking about Brian Johnson era. And so it was one of those where it wasn't completely strong, but they did have some really good highlights. So that's one of those things where those are the kind of albums where you sit there and go, oh, I really want this album, but it's only got 1 song I like or 2 songs I like. This wasn't too bad in that regards. It had 3 for the most part. You're talking about Satellite Blues, Safe in New York City, and Stiff Upper Lip. Those were the 3 big songs off of that one. And House of Jazz wasn't too bad, but I'm going to go with Stiff Upper Lip as well, just because it's a cool song. It's got a cool groove to it. And it's a little like almost sleazy to some degree, but it's still a very cool song. So that's for me is Stiff Upper Lip.
All right.
So now let's forget about 5 years. We're going to go 8 years into the future at this point. They didn't release another album for 8 years. I mean, at that point, you almost think that the band is dead, but they're still there. They're still appearing every so often. So 8 years later, they come out with the Walmart-only release called Black Ice. Yes, Walmart only. They made a deal with Walmart, and the album was released only in Walmart stores. And it still went double platinum. So that tells you that right there. For that album, it's kind of weird. I was not a big fan of the album. I don't know why, but I just never really got into the album. And I went back and listened to it when we were doing the greatest hits episodes and the worst to first. And it has better songs on it than I thought it did, but it still didn't really grab me as a whole. War Machine was a good song. Big Jack's a good song. Rock and Roll Train, the big single off of that album, is a really good song. Another single that they put out was a song called Money Made. So they did a lot of promotion on this album. But I'm going to sit there and say, for me, my favorite song on the album is going to be War Machine. It's a deeper track for some people, but it was a song that just, to me, very similar to some of the tracks on Ball Breaker. And so that's what I went with.
Okay. I do like War Machine. I think I probably like Black Ice a bit more than you do. I remember when it came out, and there was a little bit of controversy. It was only at Walmart, like you said, but it wasn't as big of a deal back then. I guess it was just, this is in the era of iTunes music, right? So a lot of people were, oh my God, I have to go out and buy a CD. But I kind of liked that approach. I'm still fond of physical media, even though we can stream so many things. It's nice to have a copy,
Well, at that time, AC/DC did not have anything on streaming. They hadn't made their deal with iTunes. They hadn't made their deal with Spotify. I don't think Spotify was even in existence at that time.
They were still holding the line at that point.
Well, they didn't want to release. They didn't want people to take individual tracks. It was either the whole album or nothing. And so, they really had to be persuaded, and eventually they made their deal with iTunes. And eventually, obviously, that opened up to Spotify as well. But yeah, they did not release anything to iTunes at the time.
So my pick is different than yours. I picked Anything Goes. And so this was interesting to me because, who would have thought that AC/DC channeling their inner Bruce Springsteen would make for a really cool song? I mean, there are some really distinct similarities to Bruce Springsteen here. And to me that's kind of surprising. One, that they did that, and two, that it's my favorite song on the album. I really like, again, when they push their sound outside of the normal boundaries. I mean, AC/DC is one of those bands that they never really changed, pretty much ever. Aside from a few things that were forced on them, unfortunately, there's not much you can do about a band member passing away. That change is going to happen, but it's not like they went, okay, now that Bond's gone, we're going to change to grunge music. They just did their thing all these years. But every once in a while, they have one song on an album that I go, wow, that's a little different. And something about that stuck out to me. So, I just like when they kind of push the boundaries, even if it's just an inch or two.
Fair enough. All right, so we move up. What do you got?
All right, so 2014, so 6 years later, they released Rock or Bust. This is another album that I'm not a big fan of. It's harder for me to find something specific that I just really love here. But the one I do really like is Baptism by Fire. So one thing about AC/DC that we've talked about a few times here is that Phil Rudd just has such a distinct sound, and he's so integral to the band sounding like they do. And it really, this is a good example. It's not just the pace, it's how hard he hits the drums. I just love how that defines AC/DC sound a lot of times. I love how the riff kind of dances up and down again, and then the solo that just keeps going. He plays the solo, then the vocal line comes back in, but the solo continues, and that's kind of a unique thing for AC/DC. Usually you have the solo end, and then the vocal line comes back, and it's just it's formulaic. But this was a little bit different again, and I just really like the track.
There was a lot of turmoil going on with AC/DC at this time. So between Malcolm retiring and just lending his songs, and their nephew Stevie Young joining the band as a full-time rhythm guitar player, they also had some issues with Phil Rudd again. And so in the end, Phil basically was out of the band by the time the album was released. And so promotional pictures did not include Phil. The album does not include Phil at all in terms of pictures. I believe they just said that he played drums on it, and that was it. And they brought Chris Slade back, which is cool for Chris, except the fact that he's living somewhere still thinking he's the drummer for AC/DC. And that's a joke. That's a joke that you and I say to each other, because there was an interview with Chris Slade, and they were getting ready to do this the album that eventually came out after this one, Power Up, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm ready to play. with the band, and so I'm just waiting to hear from them to let me know when to show up. And all of a sudden, he's not in the band.
The quote specifically was, "As far as I know, I'm still the drummer for AC/DC."
Yeah.
So we make the joke a lot because it's just poor
guy's still waiting for that call. Yeah. All right, so rock or bust. I mean, they almost went bust at this point between Phil leaving, Malcolm Young out of the band, Stevie's in, and that's family. So, and Stevie was a perfect replacement. Then they go on tour for this album, and Brian Johnson can't finish the tour. He literally, he didn't quit. And they didn't fire him, but they said adios to him. I mean, it was weird. They bid Brian Johnson farewell like it was his last Friday at the office. Thank you for your contributions. Have a nice day. It was the weirdest way to say goodbye to a band member that I had ever seen, especially for someone with his iconic status.
It was very odd. And there was the question, like, is he still in the band or not? We knew that he had lost his hearing to some extent, and we were, unsure of what the status was. But usually when somebody that's been in the band for,
40 years,
about, leaves, you get like a send-off or something.
You get more than a thank you for your contribution post on a freaking Facebook page.
You get more than the WWE send off, right?
Yeah. Well, it was a very odd time. And then the tour stopped. They literally postponed the whole tour. But AC/DC said that they were going to be back, and they were going to come back and finish and basically honor all the dates. So a lot of people were like, well, is Brian going to come back at the end of the tour, or after a year or two and honor the dates and whatever? But with the send off that they gave him, everyone thought he was out of the band. Well, lo and behold, they hold auditions for a singer, and they were holding auditions for new singers, literally trying out to be the singer of AC/DC. And one guy stood up and was chosen. Stand up and be counted. It was Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. And that was, I thought, an odd choice. And lots of people have said that they thought it was great. They saw the shows. It was wonderful. He did a great job. He sounds just like all the old singers, all wrapped up into one. And
it's very Dave Evans.
You want to know something? I'm going to be honest. I love AC/DC. I don't know what in the world people were listening to think that Axl Rose was a good fit as far as him sounding so good. I mean, he did a good job of singing. I'm not saying that. I just didn't think that it was all that great. But that's my opinion, and I'm very of the minority on that. I mean, so many people think that Axl did such a great job. I mean, he did a great job filling in, but I just didn't see where it was so outstanding. Like, wow, he could possibly be the new singer for AC/DC and make a new album with them. I didn't see that. I just did not. But anyway, rock or bust, almost busted. For me, my favorite song on that album is Rock or Bust. I just like the slow groove of the song. It was between that and Play Ball. And Play Ball, as much as it's more upbeat and a little bit more playful, I think Rock or Bust to me had a better groove, and that's why I picked that song.
All right.
So finally, we're at the last AC/DC album that has been released so far, and that is Power Up. Or some people think it's still PWR Up, whatever you want to call it, but it's Power Up. It was released in 2020. I got to tell you, it was definitely better than the last few albums. I think that album has a really good groove to it overall. There's a lot of similarities from one song to the next, but the one song for me that stands out above the rest is Demon Fire. As soon as I heard it, the second I heard that song, I said, this is my favorite track on the album. The song grooves. The song's got a great video. I don't think they've boogied that fast and that cool in a long time.
So we started off agreeing with things, and I guess we're gonna end off agreeing with things. Demon Fire, also my favorite song on the album. It just feels so classically AC/DC, but it also introduces a lot of new things. A little bit different vocal approach, and the production is just really crisp. Now, what I like also is that, they never really specifically focused on, what's the best way to put it? So, a lot of times there's a guitar harmony, or there's a rhythm and a lead guitar part in the songs, but not very often did they just bring out that one guitar sound. And Demon Fire does that, where it's very focused on that guitar riff from Angus. And I really like that here, because it's very clean, it's very crisp, it's very focused, and it just kind of sets it apart from some of the other songs on the album too. I like that it's not overly complicated, and not that really any AC/DC song is per se, but it's just, it knows what it is, it stays in its lane, but it also pushes the boundaries a little bit again with doing something different. So I just really like this track.
Yeah, I like it too. I mean, it's a very good, for lack of a better term, very good comeback album. I mean, it was 6 years since the last one. A lot of turmoil within the band. And the funny thing is that this was the same band that recorded Rock or Bust. I mean, Stevie Young was back. Cliff Williams came out of retirement. Mm-hmm. Phil Rudd was welcomed back to the band. So it was quite, Brian Johnson was welcomed back to the band. So it was quite an interesting development that happened a couple years prior to the album coming out. And then, there was a lot of rumors, and then Power Up came out. One thing to note, between Power Up, Rock or Bust, and Black Ice, all three albums were produced by Brendan O'Brien, and he's a guitar player, musician, who is an excellent producer, and he has found a niche with AC/DC to have been with them basically for 12 years as their producer. So he's done a really good job. He's found a niche with them. They have found comfortability with him. So I think that's another reason why this album really kind of did really well, because there was that comfortability.
Oh yeah. And they also, had to get over the loss of Malcolm too.
Yes.
So there's, there was issues there. It was different because Bond died suddenly, right? But Malcolm, it was a longer process, and he was losing his memory, etc. And that was hard to watch. Like, even as just a fan, I can't imagine what it's like as a brother. I mean, I guess I can, because I watched it with my grandfather. But those two were together pretty much every day for most of their lives.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Yep, so that's our AC/DC favorites. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the fact that we just babbled on and on about AC/DC and albums and favorite songs. We're going to try and do this again with another couple of bands that have a really big discography, so that we can have a nice, enjoyable conversation. But that's going to bring us now to our Big Four. And the Big Four this time, it was a little bit difficult to choose a Big Four, because we had already done a couple of other AC/DC themed episodes. So we didn't have any AC/DC songs to pick from. We didn't have any Big Four albums to pick from. So what we did is we went a little bit outside the box while still maintaining the AC/DC connection. And we chose the Big Four heavy metal / hard rock albums of 1975, which is honoring the year that AC/DC released their first album. So, you went first with the list, so I'm going to go ahead and go first on this. And for me, this was difficult to put in order, because I'm like, oh, I like that album. Oh, I like that album. But this album's cool, you know? So I kind of went with the way I feel about the albums in general, you know, even though one might be bigger than the other one. It was all for personal taste, as it always is with us. So number 4 for me was Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti. Double album, comes out obviously in 1975. It's got a ton of great songs on it. I mean, obviously a double album is going to have a lot of music, but there was a lot of good songs on this album, obviously highlighted by Kashmir. But you're talking about Custard Pie, The Rover, what's the other one that's very similar to that? I can't remember. Oh well, I'm losing my mind. That was number 4. Number 3, Black Sabbath, Sabotage. I mean, being led by Hole in the Sky, the album contains Symptom of the Universe, which is my favorite Black Sabbath song. So, Sabbath's 6th album was a pretty big deal in 1975. Number 2 for me is an album that basically, if it doesn't happen, this band no longer exists, and that's Kiss Alive. It's not a new release, as far as, there's no new music on it. They had released that earlier in the year with Dress to Kill, but this album is the album that defined who Kiss would be. Someone was able to capture the magic of their live show onto tape. They made an album, a lot of controversy about how much of it is real and not real. Bottom line is, this put Kiss on the map for good. My number 2 album for 75. But number 1 is definitely far and above better than all the rest for me, and that would be Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic. That album is absolutely hands down Aerosmith's best album for me, at least, and I think it's got some of the best tracks that they've ever done in their careers. You're talking about Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, Big 10-inch record, which is a cover song, but Toys in the Attic itself, great album. So there you have it. That's my big 4 albums for heavy metal albums for 1975. So,
I just wanted to mention this because I don't think it really matters that how live Kiss Alive is per se, because it captures that feeling though, and it was a huge album. It's debatable, I guess. You go, oh well, it's not truly live. Well, there's a lot of live albums that are not truly live, and I think it's more important that it captures the sound than it be absolutely perfect. You want it to be close, you want it to be a live album, but if there's issues, they still need to fix them so it doesn't sound like shit.
Well, and I agree with you, because who wants to take home a record that sounds like who wants to pay full price for a record that sounds like a bootleg?
Exactly.
I mean, there are obviously, look, Aerosmith released an album called Live Bootleg. It is, it comes from a tape. I get it. Some bands do that. It's okay. But when you're trying to capture something, a live sound, and you have Kiss, who doesn't necessarily, they're not perfect. And they make mistakes from time to time, throughout the show. You want something to sound good. You want it to sound, and you don't want it to be missing pockets of sound or music or vocals or anything like that. So they just recorded what they needed to record. To me, all I care about is the experience. Am I listening to a live album? Yes. That's all that matters to me, and I agree with you.
Yeah, it's sure, it's debatable, but it's also up to your preference. And honestly, it's a really cool performance. Unleashed in the East had re-recorded vocals, right? So it's all semantics. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it.
I mean, I've heard some live albums that are truly live, you know, and it's just like, yeah, you shouldn't have released that one.
True. All right, so we did have a little bit of crossover. My number 4 though is different. It's In Trance by Scorpions. You know, to me, like, I always forget that that's their third album, because those first 2 albums, they're a tough listen. But In Trance is really where they hit their stride, and it's a great album.
Isn't that when Michael joined the band?
No, that was with Uli John Roth. Francis Buchholz was still in the band, Rudolf Schenker, but it was just the 2 guitarists at that point. I think Michael was actually in it before, right? Because didn't he play on Lonesome Crow a little bit? Yeah, he was on Lonesome Crow. He left the band after that, and then he rejoined, I want to say, a few albums later.
Was it, I think he rejoined for Love Drive.
Yes. Yes, for Love Drive, because that was, yeah. I think he joined during the tour for Taken by Force, which was when Uli John Roth left. But regardless, back to In Trance. If you go back and listen to that album, it is pretty phenomenal. Night Lights is a great song. Life's Like a River, the title track In Trance. There was something about the chemistry of the band at this point, and Uli John Roth was putting out some great stuff. I think he wrote Dark Lady, Evening Wind. I mean, it's one of those albums that I think oftentimes gets overlooked because, you know, Love Drive, Animal Magnetism, Blackout, Love It for Sting, and then, you know, pretty much up until Crazy World. That's what a lot of people know as Scorpions. You know, that era of, you know, kind of becoming more metal rather than a rock band or even a bluesy rock band. But some of that early stuff is like from In Trance on, Virgin Killer, Taken by Force, and then obviously Love Drive. Those are some really good albums too. So, you know, it's one of those that I think gets overlooked, but go back and listen to that one for sure. My number 3, I want to say, was your number 4, if I'm remembering. Physical Graffiti from Led Zeppelin. Like you said, double album, but it's got like so many great songs for a double album. It's amazing, because you would think like a lot of bands struggle to put 6 or 7 good songs on one album. They got double, and almost the whole thing is just amazing. Custard Pie, Trampled Underfoot, Kashmir. I love the Wonton song. Houses
I think
of Holy.
I mentioned the Wonton song earlier, and I think what I was trying to mention was Houses of the Holy and Trampled Underfoot. Those 2 songs
Yeah,
as well.
Just fantastic album. My number 2 is your number 1, Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic. The title track, Toys in the Attic, Walk This Way, big 10-inch record, and Sweet Emotion. Sweet Emotion's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Aerosmith songs. What a great album. And my number 1, I can't remember where you placed it, but Sabotage. I'm a big fan of those first 6 Black Sabbath albums, and then, of course, the first 2 Dio Sabbath albums. I don't know if anybody's a fan of the 7th and 8th Sabbath albums all that much, but yeah, especially Technical Ecstasy. But man, Sabotage was really good. Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe, Am I Going Insane? Symptom of the Universe is like one of the best Sabbath songs, to be honest. But Hole in the Sky is so good too. That was just a killer album, and I stand by, you know, those first 6 Black Sabbath albums are near perfect.
They are pretty damn close to that. I like your list. Obviously, 3 of the same albums.
We had a lot of crossover today. It was bizarre.
Yeah, that was a lot of crossover. But you know what? For the first time doing this, and like Chris said earlier in the episode, we don't speak about this stuff ahead of time. That's the funny thing. Like whenever you guys hear this, we definitely do not ever talk to each other about what's going to be on our list, whether it's greatest hits, head to head. Worst to first or this favorites that we did today. It's just we talk about other things, but we never talk about what the episode's going to contain. We just talk about the framework, and that's it. So that's pretty amazing that we get so much right. But then again, you're talking about one of our favorite bands, and you're also talking about a very limited amount of hard rock heavy metal albums that came out in 1975. So, we're only going to go so far outside the box.
Yeah, I mean, AC/DC, I think we're more likely to have crossover than, say, maybe Judas Priest. So,
right.
And
exactly,
who knows?
Yeah.
And maybe when we do that Skid Row, one.
Yeah. I don't know about that one. All right. Well, that's our big 4 heavy metal hard rock albums of 1975. And that's the end of this week's show. Please remember to click the like or subscribe button, download the show on your favorite podcast platform, and listen to us anytime that you want.
And don't forget you can interact with us by commenting on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can send us a DM as well. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment, or you can send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. So remember to tune in next week as we spark up another exciting debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.